"The free ride ends today," my husband announced, deciding we'd keep separate finances from now on. I said sure, knowing he'd beg to reverse it soon. On Sunday, like always, my in-laws came for lunch. But when my mother-in-law stepped into the kitchen, she screamed so loud that even the neighbors came running. My husband, Leonard, with a smug smirk, declared we'd have separate budgets, effectively ending my comfortable life at his expense. Oh, honey, he had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Because that Sunday, when his mother walked into my kitchen and screamed so loud the neighbors heard, it wasn't because I'd failed, it was because I'd finally, utterly won. My name is Mary Ann, and I want to tell you something that completely changed my life. That Friday night, after I'd spent hours meticulously preparing a 3-course dinner for my husband Leonard's parents, he looked at me with this calculated calm. You know, the one that makes your skin crawl, and told me my comfortable life at his expense was over. Just like that. Those were his exact words, spoken in the very living room we bought thanks to money I inherited from my grandmother, Grandma Teresa. I can still hear his tone, the icy coldness in his voice, as if he were signing a contract instead of casually destroying the balance of our marriage. You see, there are some humiliations that don't hit you like a slap. They don't hurt right away. They seep in, slow and insidious, like silent poison, gradually paralyzing you before you even notice. Have you ever felt utterly invisible in your own home? Like everything you do, every ounce of effort, just doesn't count? It's a devastating feeling. And the worst part, you get used to it, little by little, until one day something snaps. You just explode. Believe me, you won't want to miss what happens when a woman finally gets tired of tolerating everything and decides it's time to start charging for what she does. It all started right after his parents, Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett, left. Every other Friday, they came to visit their son. In reality, it meant I spent at least 6 hours cooking, cleaning, arranging flowers, making sure every corner of the house was spotless. All just so Veronica could perform her infamous inspection and drop one of her passive-aggressive remarks about my little graphic design hobby. She loved to say it was nice that I had something to keep me busy, as if my actual, paying job wasn't real work. That evening, the conversation, as it always did, turned to how we'd managed to buy such a beautiful house in the New York City suburbs. Leonard, chest puffed out with pride, droned on about his hard work, his vision, and how he'd invested wisely, conveniently omitting that most of the down payment had come directly from my inheritance. The moment the door closed behind his parents, he turned to me with that arrogant smile I've always despised. "Sweetheart," he said, "starting with the next payment, we'll have separate budgets. Your comfortable life at my expense is over." He delivered it with the calm confidence of someone who thought he had everything totally under control. He was waiting for me to break down, to beg, to cry. But all I felt was a sudden, chilling calm. The utter injustice of his words hit me like a truth that had always been simmering beneath the surface, finally boiling over. I was the one working until 2 in the morning on my tablet, designing logos, editing videos, completing freelance projects for my clients. I was the one managing the household accounts, doing the shopping, paying the bills, and decorating every single room with my taste, and, yes, my money. Every Sunday, I cooked what felt like a feast for his parents, appetizers, main course, dessert, only to have Veronica dissect my sauce or critique the doneness of the meat. To them, all of that was just invisible. They saw it as simply my duty as a wife, something expected, never appreciated. My financial contribution, even if irregular, was dismissed as a whim. And my inheritance was treated as pure luck that didn't count. Something Leonard conveniently chose to forget. In that moment, everything became painfully, sickeningly clear. He didn't see me as his partner. He saw me as a luxury employee, a woman he was supporting. I remember the first time I truly felt that sense of invisibility. It was during our very first Sunday lunch in this house. I'd spent 2 full days preparing roasted pork with Grandma Teresa's recipe. I was so excited, so proud, so eager to please. When Veronica took the first bite, she simply said, "It's a bit dry. Next time, let me supervise you so it turns out better." Leonard said nothing. He just lowered his head, kept eating, and gave his mother a faint, approving smile. That day, I understood. Every Sunday would be a test, and I was destined to fail. My kitchen, my creative space and refuge, had been transformed into a courtroom. And I was always the accused, never allowed to defend myself. The quartz countertop I'd chosen and paid for with my own money seemed to mock me, a silent witness to my ignored efforts and growing resentment. So, when Leonard threw that phrase at me that Friday, I could see in his eyes that he was expecting a scene. His rigid posture, the way he clenched his jaw, everything screamed that he was ready for a confrontation. He wanted my tears, my anger. The same fight that always ended with him playing the magnanimous, powerful one, setting boundaries. I'm sure he already had his speech prepared about financial responsibility and how it was all for our own good. He desperately wanted to reaffirm himself as the provider, the head of the household, a role his parents had relentlessly drilled into him. But that night, the woman he thought he knew, the one who stayed quiet through criticism and tried desperately to please everyone, was gone. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't a planned decision. It was like a blinding spark deep inside my mind. All the pain, all the years of humiliation condensed into a single, sharp, undeniable idea. The noisy voices in my head, the ones trying to justify him, understand him, blame myself, went silent. Only an absolute stillness remained. Powerful, full of possibility. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see the man I'd fallen in love with. I saw a stranger, acting out a role his mother had written for him. And in that silence, I found my answer. To his complete surprise, I smiled. It wasn't forced or sarcastic. It was real, calm, almost a relief. I looked up and said softly, "Excellent idea, darling. It's about time we had some financial clarity." His reaction was almost comical. He just stared at me, mouth half open, unsure if I was serious or mocking him. He blinked several times, confused, while I kept my tone steady, confident. There would be no war that night. No tears. Instead, I offered him my best weapon, my composure. I picked up my tablet from the coffee table, the same one where I spent hours working, and turned it on. The soft glow of the screen lit up my face. "Let's start," I said. "How about we make a list of shared and individual expenses? That way, everything will be ready for the next payment cycle. I want this to be fair for both of us." His confusion turned into something close to fear. He wasn't prepared for my calmness, for my efficiency. He wanted drama, but I gave him a business meeting. And within seconds, the power shifted. He didn't even notice. That night, while Leonard slept beside me, I couldn't. My tablet rested on my lap, but I wasn't working for a client. I was working on something far more important, my escape plan. I made a detailed list of every single household task I did. Meal planning, shopping, cleaning, budgeting, coordinating maintenance. Every invisible job that kept our life running. Next to each task, I looked up how much people in New York City charged for those exact services. A personal chef, a housekeeper, a household manager, an event planner. The numbers added up, one by one, until they formed a surprising total. That's when I knew exactly what I would do. My plan for Sunday lunch began to take shape. A plan both beautiful and terrifying. The clarity Leonard claimed to want was about to arrive, though definitely not in the way he imagined. On Saturday morning, the house felt different. The air was still, heavy with a quiet tension. No clattering pots, no smell of spices, no frantic rush of me trying to make everything perfect. Leonard came downstairs, probably expecting to find me in the kitchen, maybe regretful or worried. Instead, he found me sitting on the patio sofa, a cup of coffee in my hand, my tablet on my lap. He stared silently, waiting for me to speak. I looked up and smiled calmly. "Good morning, darling," I said. I slept wonderfully. His face was priceless. He didn't understand anything. Peace had become my new weapon, and he had no defense against it. He didn't realize that the woman he had humiliated the night before no longer existed. In her place was a strategist who had spent the night calculating the exact price of her freedom. All day he tried to provoke me, throwing comments about how nice it must be to enjoy my day off, as if he didn't know my weeks were filled with endless work and sleepless nights. While I was focused on one of my designs, he walked behind me and said mockingly, "Good thing you have time for your little drawings." Each word from him just opened a deeper gap between us. In the past, phrases like that would have hurt, made me feel guilty or lazy. But now, every comment was just another line in the mental invoice I was drafting. I listened without reacting, nodded with a calm serenity that drove him crazy. And in my mind, I added an extra charge for emotional damage. He didn't realize he was no longer talking to his wife, but to a service provider about to hand him her bill. His arrogance was the fuel feeding my new determination. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store, but it wasn't the usual weekend shopping trip. There were no pork ribs for his father, No expensive wine his mother loved, no ingredients for those forced family feasts. This time, I walked the aisles with a different purpose. I bought Greek yogurt, just for me. A good salmon fillet. Avocados. Blueberries. The specialty coffee I love. Every item I placed in the cart was a silent declaration of independence. At the checkout, I paid with my own card and felt a small but incredibly powerful satisfaction. It was the first time in a long while that I had bought food just for me, for my taste, my health, my needs. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming my space, not only in the house, but in my entire life. When I got back and started putting away my groceries, I stood for a moment, looking at the kitchen. That dream kitchen, with its veined white quartz island and stainless steel appliances, was my pride. I had designed it myself, chosen every detail, from the cabinet handles to the lighting. And above all, I had paid for it with a large portion of the money left to me by Grandma Teresa. I remembered what she told me the day she gave me the inheritance papers. "It's for you to build your independence, sweetheart, not anyone else's." A wave of guilt formed in my chest as I thought about how I had betrayed her, how I'd allowed my investment to become the stage for my own servitude. But that guilt quickly solidified into a decision as firm as steel. I would honor her memory, and this kitchen would become the place where my independence was reborn. As the sun set behind the buildings of New York City, doubt tried to sneak into my mind. I sat on the porch, wondering if I was being too drastic. Maybe I should talk to him, try once more to make him understand. But then, like a ghost, last Christmas came back to me. I had spent 3 days cooking for 20 of his relatives. I was exhausted but satisfied, until I heard Veronica whisper to her sister, "Poor Leonard. He works so hard while Marian just plays house." No one defended me. Leonard, standing right beside her, just smiled. That memory erased any hesitation. No, I wasn't being drastic. I was being fair. For the first time, I was putting myself first. That Saturday's dinner was an odd scene. I ordered a salad from a nearby restaurant, just for myself. Leonard looked at me, waiting for me to offer him some, but I didn't. He quietly got up and made himself a ham and cheese sandwich with the oldest bread he could find in the pantry. We ate in heavy silence, broken only by the sound of silverware. He expected me to speak first, to find the quiet unbearable, and eventually break down crying or yelling. But I savored every bite of my salad with a calm that was entirely new, tasting the flavor of my own self-assertion. He had asked for separate budgets and clear rules, and I was giving them to him, to the letter. What he didn't understand was that his attempt to control me had actually set me free. The cage he built for me had opened, and I was learning to fly again, right inside my own home. Sunday morning arrived with an eerie peace. I woke up early, as always. But instead of rushing to the kitchen to marinate meat or prepare dessert, I made myself a cup of tea and went out to the patio to read. The city sunlight started to warm the air, and the house was in complete silence. No clanging pots, no smell of frying garlic, only birdsong and the soft whisper of the breeze. For the first time in many years, a Sunday morning didn't feel like the start of another unpaid workday, but like what it was supposed to be, a day of rest. I felt a deep peace, the kind that comes when you know you're about to reclaim what's rightfully yours. Leonard came downstairs around 9. His eyes scanned the spotless, empty kitchen, and a line of worry appeared on his forehead. "Don't tell me you're not cooking." "My parents are coming at 1, he said, his voice almost childish, like a kid afraid his birthday party was about to be canceled. I looked at him over the top of my book and replied as naturally as if we were talking about the weather. "No, sweetheart. Sunday lunches were part of my household management services. And since we now have separate budgets, that service comes with a fee. If you'd like to hire me, we can discuss the rates." His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to barely contained anger. I could almost hear the gears in his head turning desperately, trying to find a way to regain control. But I no longer played his game. A few minutes later, his phone rang. Of course, it was Veronica. I could hear him from the living room, speaking in a low, tense voice. "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine. Yes, of course. Something simpler today. A surprise." I could hear the falseness in his tone, the raw panic hidden beneath it. The man who always bragged about being in control, the provider, the head of the family, was trapped in his own web. He hung up and looked at me with a fury I had never seen before. "Fix this, Marianne," he ordered. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was desperate. I simply shook my head. "I'm sorry, Leonard. You set the rules. With a calmness that even surprised me, I picked up my tablet, the same one he always dismissed as my little drawing toy. I opened the spreadsheet app where I had drafted my plan on Friday night and created a new document with a clean, professional design, just like the ones I present to my best clients. At the top, I wrote, "Invoice for cooking and household management services." I began breaking down the costs: menu planning, purchasing quality ingredients, preparation and cooking, 6 hours of labor at the rate of a private chef in New York City, table service, and cleanup. Each line had a value based on real market prices. The total was beautiful, neat, round, and absolutely fair. My work tool had become the instrument of my own justice. When the clock struck 1, I went to the refrigerator. I took out the salmon, avocados, and vegetables I had bought for myself. With steady movements, I began preparing my own lunch. At the same time, I grabbed a roll of labels and a marker. I opened the Greek yogurt and wrote on a label, "Property of Marianne." I did the same with my coffee, my fruit, and my bottle of wine. It was a small, almost absurd gesture, but one full of meaning. I was drawing a line, not only in the fridge, but in our lives. He wanted separation, and I was giving it to him in the most literal way possible. I could hear his restless footsteps pacing through the living room, the rhythm marking time until the inevitable moment. The doorbell was about to ring, and I was ready. The show was about to begin. At exactly 1 o'clock, the bell rang. A sharp sound, cutting through the silence of the house like a knife. Each vibration ran down my spine, not with fear, but with a strange sense of anticipation. It was the signal, the moment I had been preparing for. I watched Leonard leap from the sofa, as if jolted by electricity. His face, pale and covered in sweat, was a map of pure panic. He ran to the door, smoothing his shirt and trying to put on a smile that never reached his eyes. He was about to play his usual role: the perfect husband, the dutiful son, the confident host. The illusion of a happy family. The man of the house, without realizing that the foundations of his castle were about to collapse. From the calm of the patio, my coffee still warm in my hand, I felt like I was watching a play. I was the director, and he was the tragic protagonist, unaware that he was about to face the final act. The moment he opened the door, his transformation was instant. His voice turned loud and artificially cheerful, that rehearsed tone I knew so well. "Mom, Dad, welcome. Come in, please." Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett walked in with the confidence of people who felt they owned the place. Veronica wore a flawless white linen suit that probably cost more than my last design invoice. She scanned the room, looking for me, and when she didn't see me, she lifted her chin in disdain. "How strange," she said loudly. "It doesn't smell like anything today. Usually, you can smell the roast pork from the entrance." Mr. Bennett, as always, remained silent, but his eyes swept the living room, noticing the stillness, the absence of the usual bustle that signaled their arrival. The first stone had been thrown, and I hadn't even moved. Leonard, sweating visibly, tried desperately to distract his parents. "Today, I wanted to give you a surprise. Something different. Why don't you sit in the living room? Can I get you something to drink? A glass of wine? Maybe whiskey?" His attempt to act like the perfect host was pathetic. He never served the drinks. That had always been my job. Veronica ignored him completely and set her designer purse down on the sofa I had chosen and paid for. Her goal was clear, and she wouldn't be distracted by a drink. "First, I'll go to the kitchen to see if Marianne needs help. She's probably overwhelmed by the surprise she prepared." The word surprise dripped with sarcasm. To her, I was incapable of doing anything right without her supervision, and she couldn't wait to find a mistake, any excuse to reassert her supposed superiority. With the determination of a general inspecting her troops, she headed for the kitchen. Leonard tried to stop her, placing a hand on her arm. "Mom, really, there's no need. I'll take care of it," he said, almost pleading. She brushed him off impatiently, like swatting away a bothersome child. "Don't be ridiculous, Leonard. I know your wife. She probably needs help." And without waiting for an answer, she walked toward the hallway. From my seat on the patio, through the glass door, I had a perfect view of the unfolding scene. I saw Leonard's stiff back, his helpless shoulders slumped. I didn't feel sorry for him. What I felt was a strange, almost pleasant calm. It was poetic justice. He had unleashed this storm with his arrogance, and now he would have to face the hurricane he himself had summoned. His mother. The serenity that filled me was so deep, it almost felt supernatural. The peace of knowing that for the first time, the script was entirely in my hands. It was in that brief moment of silence before the storm that I heard the sentence that sealed my decision. Mr. Bennet, who had stayed behind near the door, approached his son and asked quietly, "Everything okay, son? You look nervous." Leonard's reply was a venomous whisper, full of contempt. But I caught every word. "It's nothing, Dad. She's just being dramatic again. I had to put her in her place about the money. She'll get over it once she realizes she can't live without my credit card." Every single word was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. This wasn't an argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was how he truly saw me. A burden. A parasite. A woman who, in his mind, couldn't survive without him. At that moment, my plan stopped being a lesson. It became a sentence. Veronica stepped into the kitchen. The silence that followed said more than any words could. I could imagine the scene without even moving. Her eyes scanning the spotless white quartz counters, the dry, shining sink, the cold stove, the closed cabinets. Everything immaculate, like a magazine photo, but utterly lifeless. She had expected the scent of spices, the warmth of the oven, the bubbling of pots. Instead, she found sterile silence. The emptiness of a broken routine. I could almost feel her confusion, her mind racing to find a logical explanation. Maybe she thought the food was in the patio oven, or that everything was ready and I was just waiting to serve. But that stillness had to be eating away at her reasoning. Then came the scream. It wasn't just a startled shriek. It was a roar of pure fury. A guttural sound that ripped through the air and shook the walls of the house. It was the cry of a queen who had been defied. A matriarch who had not received her tribute. I heard the hurried footsteps of Leonard and Mr. Bennet rushing toward the kitchen. They entered to find Veronica standing in the middle of the tiled floor I had chosen, her face red, one trembling finger pointing at the refrigerator. Her expression was a mix of rage and disbelief, as if she had discovered an act of treason instead of an empty kitchen. The show had reached its first climax. Leonard's face changed. Confusion gave way to panic, then to cold fury as his eyes finally met mine. I stood in the doorway leading to the patio, watching everything with a calmness that must have seemed inhuman to him. In my hands was my tablet, my work tool, that little drawing toy he used to mock. The lit screen cast a soft glow over my face. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Mr. Bennet looked from me to his wife and back to his son, trying to make sense of what was happening. But Veronica didn't need explanations. To her, the culprit stood right before her eyes. Her small, dark pupils locked onto mine, burning with a fury that promised war. I knew I was about to face the wrath of a woman who had never heard the word no. Before Leonard could come up with an excuse or his father could intervene, Veronica caught her breath and spoke in a tone that sliced through the air like a whip. "Would you care to explain what this means, Marianne?" she spat, each word dripping with disdain. "Is this supposed to be a joke? It's 1:15. Where's the lunch you were supposed to make?" The emphasis on supposed to said everything. To her, I wasn't family. I was staff. Her cook. Her hostess. Her guarantee of comfort. She didn't ask if I was okay, if something had happened. She only wanted her meal, her routine, her right to be served in my house. She was so certain of her power over me that it never even crossed her mind that I might have a reason. Without saying a word, I stepped forward. The silence grew heavier. I lifted my tablet and turned the screen toward them. The document I had prepared on Friday night glowed with professional precision. At the top, in an elegant font I had designed myself, the title read, "Invoice, Sunday Lunch Services." I let the image speak for itself. I saw confusion flicker on Mr. Bennet's face. Veronica's fury dissolved into bewilderment, and pure terror flashed in Leonard's eyes. He, and only he, understood immediately what he was seeing. He had asked for financial clarity, and I was handing it to him on a silver platter. With a calm so cold it chilled the air, I raised the tablet higher, letting the bluish light of the screen wash over their stunned faces. The silence in the kitchen pressed against my ears. Mr. Bennet blinked repeatedly, as if trying to focus on a reality that didn't make sense to him. Veronica, on the other hand, had gone from fiery anger to absolute confusion, so complete it seemed to erase every thought from her mind. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. But it was Leonard's face that stayed etched in my memory like a photograph. His skin waxy and pale, his features tight and drained of color. His eyes, fixed on the screen, held no anger, no wounded pride, only raw, naked fear. The fear of a man watching the carefully built house of cards of his control collapse with one simple breath of truth. Veronica was the first to break the silence. She did it with a laugh. A sharp, hollow sound. It wasn't sincere or amused, but the nervous reflex of someone trying to regain control of a situation slipping away. "Oh, please, Marianne. What a silly joke," she said, feigning calm. "Come on now. Stop the theatrics. Turn that thing off and tell us what you prepared for lunch. You must be hiding it somewhere to surprise us." She stepped toward me with that forced smile she used whenever she wanted to remind everyone who she thought was in charge. She lifted her hand to pat my arm, condescending, almost maternal. But I didn't move. Her hand met only empty air. Her smile vanished instantly. My eyes never left hers. "It's not a joke, Veronica," I said slowly. "It's a business proposal." My voice sounded strangely foreign, as if it didn't belong in that house, as if it were the voice of an executive in a boardroom, not a wife in her own kitchen. I spoke with the precision of someone presenting a report. As Leonard proposed on Friday, we've implemented a complete separation of budgets. And since family event catering was not part of our original agreement, it is now billed separately. The standard rate is $350 and includes menu planning, the purchase of high-quality ingredients, 6 hours of labor at a private chef's rate in New York City, table service, and post-meal cleanup. Every word was cold, calculated, stripped of emotion. I was speaking their language, money, numbers, transactions, the only language they truly respected. That's when Leonard reacted, not with words, but with a violent movement. He took a long step toward me, trying to snatch the tablet from my hands, as if destroying it could erase the reality displayed on its screen. "That's enough, Marianne. Give me that," he growled, his voice low and thick with restrained rage. "What do you think you're doing? You're embarrassing us in front of my parents." His fury was predictable. I had already anticipated it. I stepped back calmly, keeping the tablet out of reach. I looked him straight in the eye without a trace of fear. The woman who used to shrink at his shouting was gone. In her place stood an unshakable stillness. A still, cold calm that unsettled him even more than the invoice itself. "Ridiculous?" I said softly but sharply. "Let me explain what's really ridiculous, Leonard. Ridiculous was you standing in this very room telling me my comfortable life at your expense was over. Ridiculous is that you said it while standing on a floor I paid for, in a kitchen where every appliance was bought with my money, inside a house whose down payment, 80% of it, came directly from my grandmother's inheritance." Each word landed like a hammer blow. The impact was immediate. Mr. Bennett took a step back, looking at his son with an expression I couldn't decipher. The story they had built for years, that of the model son supporting his artist wife, crumbled to dust. Mentioning the inheritance was breaking a taboo. Everyone knew it existed, but no one dared speak of it aloud. Veronica looked at me with pure hatred. I was no longer just the insolent daughter-in-law. I was now a threat to her pride and the family's reputation. "You ungrateful woman," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you. We gave you a name, a place, a family." She tried her old weapons. Guilt, shame, the weight of the status she believed she had bestowed on me. But those bullets bounced harmlessly off the armor of truth and self-respect. Without a word, I turned around slowly. Deliberately. Almost theatrically. I walked to the refrigerator, the one filled with my neatly labeled items, opened the door, and the light illuminated a small army of tags bearing my name. It was a powerful image. The tangible symbol of my independence. I took out a bottle of sparkling water, one of the expensive ones Leonard used to call a useless luxury. When I opened it, the hiss of carbonation sounded loud and defiant in the quiet kitchen. I took a long sip, keeping my eyes fixed on them. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The message was as clear as the glass of water I was drinking. This is my space. These are my things. And I decide what happens here. My silence was my declaration of war. The calm on my face seemed to break something inside him. His expression twisted into a mix of fury and humiliation. He had lost control of the scene, of the audience, and of me. Desperate to reclaim it, he resorted to his last weapon, a threat. "This ends now, Marianne," he said in a trembling voice. "You're going to turn off that damn tablet, apologize to my parents for this circus, and start cooking something, or I swear you'll pack your things and get out of my house right now." The words "my house" echoed hollowly. It was his final pathetic attempt to assert an authority he no longer had. I turned slowly to face him, still holding the cold bottle in my hand, as cold as my resolve. A small, steady smile, not mocking, just sure, appeared on my lips. I looked straight into his eyes, those eyes I had once loved, but that now reflected only the fear of a stranger, and let the silence stretch before I shattered his threat with surgical calm. "Allow me to correct you, Leonard," I said in a low, precise voice. "It's not your house. It's mostly mine. My inheritance money is legally recorded in the purchase." I dropped that truth into the kitchen like a bomb. The silence that followed was explosive. I saw realization dawn on Veronica's and Mr. Bennett's faces. They finally understood they weren't looking at a rebellious wife. They were standing in front of the rightful owner of the house they were in. Leonard was speechless. His threat collapsed at his feet. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had flipped completely. I finished my water in one steady sip and added, just as calmly, "The offer still stands. $400 for the lunch service. Or if you prefer, we can start negotiating a rental agreement. I can draft it right now." I paused, then added with restrained irony, "That, of course, is also a billable service." My words hung in the air before settling. The shock seemed to absorb all the oxygen from the room. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, charged with the reality we were all facing. Veronica stared at me, eyes wide, her face shifting from disbelief to a rage so deep it seemed unable to escape her throat. Mr. Bennett stood motionless, his gaze fixed on me, not disapproving anymore, but calculating, as if reassessing a failed investment. And Leonard was pale, almost translucent, as though my revelation hadn't just shattered his argument, but drained the very life from him. He stood there in the middle of my kitchen like a ghost, lost in the wreckage of his own disaster. Veronica was the first to explode, as expected, though her anger no longer carried the force it once had. It sounded like a storm that had lost its center. "You manipulative liar," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual command. "How dare you talk to us about money, about contracts? This is my son's house," she added, looking around as if that alone could reassert her power. "You've poisoned his mind," she went on, clinging to her old script, the one where she was the queen and I was the ungrateful servant. But now her words rang hollow, desperate, like blanks fired against a wall of concrete. The power she had wielded for years, built on guilt, duty, and shame, had simply evaporated. The moment I confronted her fantasies with the hard facts of financial reality, I ignored her. She was no longer my focus. I turned my gaze to her husband, the quiet foundation of all that authority. I looked him straight in the eyes, a calm rising from deep within me. "Mr. Bennett," I said evenly, "you're a businessman. You understand assets, liabilities, returns, and investments. My grandmother left me an inheritance, and with that money, I paid for 80% of the down payment on this property. Leonard contributed the remaining 20%, and his salary covers part of the mortgage, while my income as a designer pays for maintenance and all household expenses." I paused, keeping my voice professional. "Tell me, as a man of numbers, do you think it's fair that the majority shareholder of this asset be treated as an unpaid employee?" I was speaking his language, the language of tangible value, of numbers that leave no room for debate. Mr. Bennett didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted from me to his son, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of disappointment cross his face. Then he turned toward his wife, whose expression was tight, distorted by frustration. Finally, he looked back at me. His eyes no longer held disdain, but something new. A cool assessment, almost a quiet respect. He didn't say a word, but his silence was the clearest response. In the court of logic and facts, the case was closed. It wasn't a victory for me. It was a sentence for Leonard. His father, with that silence, had just confirmed everything I'd said, and that destroyed him. I saw him deflate like the air leaving a balloon. The arrogance, the fury, the pride, all of it vanished, leaving behind only a hollow sadness. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze and his parents'. "That's enough, Marianne," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "You won. That's what you wanted, isn't it? You won. You ruined Sunday. You ruined everything." It wasn't an apology. It was the whine of a child blaming someone else for breaking a toy he had already smashed himself. He blamed me for revealing the truth, not realizing that he was the one who had built the lie. To Leonard, my act of independence was an act of destruction. I slowly shook my head, and a shadow of genuine sadness passed through me. "I didn't ruin anything, Leonard," I said quietly. "I just held up a mirror. What you saw in it was already broken long ago. The only difference is that today I decided to stop pretending I didn't see the cracks. I walked calmly to the kitchen island and set my tablet down on the quartz counter, the same place where my plan had begun. My work tool, the one he used to belittle as my little drawing toy, now rested motionless, its purpose fulfilled. The invoice still glowed on the screen, like a digital epitaph for our marriage, exactly as it had been until that day. I took my phone from my pocket, and since we're all so intent on treating everything as business, I said, looking at Veronica, allow me one last professional gesture. I dialed a number I knew by heart. A voice answered immediately. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Good afternoon, I replied in a polite, almost cheerful tone. I'd like to confirm a reservation for 3 people under the name Veronica Bennett. Yes, that's right. For lunch. Could it be on the terrace? Perfect. Thank you very much. I hung up and looked at them. Their faces were a portrait of confusion. I've reserved a table for you at one of the most exclusive restaurants on the Upper East Side, I said evenly. It's a gift from me. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience, and for the catering service not provided today. It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a gesture of power, an elegant dismissal. I was offering them luxury, the same luxury they had always used to underline their superiority. But this time it came from me, not as a plea, but as a statement of hierarchy. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Veronica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mr. Bennett watched me with a complicated expression, part surprise, part faint amusement, as if recognizing a master stroke. Leonard, on the other hand, sank further into his defeat. I hadn't beaten him with shouting or tears, but with precision, with a calculated courtesy that left him unarmed, with no way out. He had lost on his own battlefield of power and status. We're not going anywhere, Veronica stammered finally, looking to her husband for backup. Charles, for heaven's sake, say something. Do something. But for the first time in all the years I'd known them, Mr. Bennett didn't side with her. He shook his head slowly, with a finality that left no doubt. Let's go, Veronica, he said, his voice calm but firm. I think Marianne has made herself perfectly clear. It was the final blow. The patriarch, the silent judge, had just delivered his verdict, and it wasn't in favor of his own blood. He had chosen reason over loyalty, truth over pretense. Veronica's face crumbled. In seconds, she seemed to age 10 years. She had been betrayed by her son, who hadn't defended the family's honor, and abandoned by her husband, who refused to fight a lost war. With clumsy movements, she grabbed her designer purse, the ridiculous symbol of a status that no longer existed, and without even looking at me, walked past toward the front door. Mr. Bennett followed her, but paused in the doorway. He looked at me for a long moment and gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology or approval. It was acknowledgement between equals. Then he left, closing the door with a soft, final click. The echo of that sound lingered in the air, marking the end of one act and the uncertain beginning of another. Only Leonard and I remained in the silent house. He hadn't moved. He stood there in the middle of the kitchen, shoulders slumped, staring at the empty space his parents had just left behind. After a while, he finally lifted his head. His eyes no longer held anger, only confusion, loss, and the dawning, bitter understanding of what had just happened. The war with his parents had ended in total surrender. But the one between us had only just begun. And for the first time, in the silence of my kitchen, I felt ready for it. Leonard still stood there, motionless, turned to stone. A statue amidst the ruins of his own kingdom. The silence his parents left behind was heavier than any scream. I watched him for a few seconds, waiting for a reaction, a word, something to break the stillness, but nothing came. He finally sat down on one of the stools at the island, the same one where he had given me his ultimatum 2 nights earlier, and buried his face in his hands. There was no anger left in his posture, only the crushing weight of total defeat. And in that instant, I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. What filled me instead was a deep emptiness. The recognition that the man I had once loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had. In front of me wasn't a husband, but a stranger sitting in my kitchen, mourning not the loss of his partner, but the loss of his audience. That night, we didn't speak a word. I took my pillow and a blanket and settled in the guest room, the same one I used as my office. Closing that door was more final than any argument. It was the physical wall that symbolized the emotional barrier he had built for years. The next morning, when I came downstairs, he was already gone for work. On the quartz countertop lay a note in his rushed handwriting. "We need to talk." I didn't read the rest. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. We had talked enough. Now was time to act. I spent the day contacting attorney Julia Harper, a lawyer specializing in real estate and divorce cases recommended by one of my clients. The conversation was clear, direct, and surprisingly liberating. For the first time, I was planning for my future, not ours. A week later, I met Leonard, not at the house, but in the neutral setting of a coffee shop. I handed him a folder. It contained a copy of the property deed, bank statements showing the transfer of my inheritance money for the down payment, and a detailed proposal for asset division. Everything was organized into clean, precise spreadsheets, as meticulous as the invoice I had once shown his mother. I watched as he read. His face turned pale. In those cold, black-and-white numbers, the fiction that he had been the sole provider collapsed. Every figure was a mirror reflecting a truth he could no longer deny. "Marianne, please," he whispered, looking up. "We can fix this. I promise I'll change. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll do anything." His promises sounded hollow. Echoes from a past that no longer had a place in my life. The relationship with his parents disintegrated in the most predictable way. Veronica tried calling me a dozen times the next day, alternating between furious voicemails and falsely conciliatory messages. I didn't answer any of them. I blocked her number, and Mr. Bennett's too. A few days later, I received an email from him. It was brief and formal. "We regret what happened on Sunday. Leonard has explained the financial side. We hope you can resolve your matters in the best way possible." It wasn't an apology. It was a strategic withdrawal. They knew they had lost their access, their influence, their privileges. They were cutting their losses. I never heard from them again, and their absence felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale air. The fate of the house, that supposed nest of love that had become my gilded cage, was resolved with the same cold efficiency as everything else. On my lawyer's advice, I gave Leonard two options. He could buy out my share of the property, which would mean securing a mortgage for nearly 80% of its current market value, or we could sell and split the profit according to our documented contributions. Of course, he couldn't afford the first option. His salary, though decent, wasn't enough to sustain the illusion of luxury he loved to project without my capital. Reluctantly, he agreed to sell. Watching him sign the papers was the true end of our marriage. There were no tears, no shouting, only the sound of a pen signing the close of a story. 2 weeks later, while I was in a client meeting, he moved out. When I returned, half the closets were empty. His personal things were gone. On the countertop, he left his keys and a note. "I'm sorry." I never knew what he was sorry for. Humiliating me? Destroying our marriage? Or simply for being caught? Through a mutual friend, I later heard he'd moved into a small apartment near his office. Functional. Charmless. Cramped. His comfortable life was over. But not at my expense. It had collapsed under its own weight. He wanted separate budgets and ended up with a separate life. The house sold quickly in New York City's competitive market. On closing day, I received a transfer large enough to guarantee not just security, but absolute freedom. With part of that money, I rented a beautiful loft in Soho. Brick walls, large windows, warm light flooding my new space. Marianne Carter Design Studio. The rest I invested, following Grandma Teresa's advice. Build your independence, not someone else's. My business began to thrive. Without Sunday lunches. Without the constant pressure to seek approval that never came. My creativity took flight. I landed major clients. Ambitious projects. What had once been my hobby became a solid, successful company. Now, when I sit in my studio with my tablet on my lap, I sometimes think about that white quartz kitchen. Not with bitterness, but with quiet gratitude. It was the stage of my greatest humiliation, yes, but also of my greatest liberation. These days, I cook only for pleasure. I invite friends who genuinely enjoy my food and fill my home with laughter instead of criticism. Leonard, Veronica, and Mr. Bennett are just characters in a distant story. Shadows of another life. I wish them no harm. I simply wish them nothing at all. They occupy zero space in my present. The life I have now, I designed it myself. With my own rules. My own colors. My own rhythm. Friday nights are no longer something I dread, but something I celebrate. Sometimes I order my favorite food. Other times, I open a bottle of wine and work late on a project I'm passionate about, simply because I want to. I look around at this space that is entirely mine, built with my work and effort. And I finally understand what true wealth means. It's not in a huge house or a three-course dinner. It's in the quiet peace of living by your own rules. My name no longer appears on makeshift labels inside a refrigerator. It's engraved on my studio door, on my invoices, on my project contracts, and on the contract of my happiness. That's a value no one can ever measure or take away. If I learned anything from this whirlwind, it's that your worth is not an opinion others get to debate. It's not measured by a husband's approval, a mother-in-law's praise, or anyone else's validation. It's a fact. For years, I allowed their perception of me to define my own. I let their blindness make me disappear. Their criticism convinced me I wasn't enough. I used to think that if I just tried harder, cooked better, kept the house spotless, they would finally see my worth. But the problem was never my effort. The problem was their inability to recognize it. The greatest lesson wasn't teaching them my value. It was reminding myself of it. The irony is that Leonard was right about one thing. It was time to end the comfortable life at someone else's expense. He just picked the wrong person. The comfortable life was his, built on my inheritance, sustained by my invisible labor, and decorated with my emotional energy. He and his parents had been enjoying the benefits of a partnership where only one partner paid the full price. My story isn't unique. Millions of women around the world are silent partners in their own lives, contributing invisible capital, time, energy, love, organization, assets that never appear on any balance sheet. Yet, without them, everything would collapse. That invoice I showed on my tablet was never really about $350. It was a statement of principles, a boundary I should have drawn long before. Putting a price on my work was never about getting rich. It was my way of making it clear that what I do isn't free. Sometimes, the only way to make people understand the value of what you do is to show them the cost of not having it. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're lines we draw to protect ourselves, to teach the world how we deserve to be treated. And the hardest, most vital lesson is this: you are the one who must hold that pencil. No one else will draw the line for you. True strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it reveals itself in the quiet certainty of a firm decision. My power didn't come from conflict. It was born in the deep calm of that Friday night, when his humiliation met not my tears but my smile. We live in a society that teaches women to defend themselves through emotion, to cry, to beg, to explain. But there is immense power in logic, in serenity, in using the very tools of the system that tries to hold you down to set yourself free. My tablet, that little drawing toy he once mocked, became my sword. My knowledge of home management and finances became my shield. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply presented the facts. And facts, unlike opinions, are not up for debate. If you're listening to my story and you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or taken for granted, I want you to know something. Your work, your effort, your time, they matter. Even if no one else is keeping count. Don't wait for humiliation to start valuing what you do. Start today. Make a mental list of everything you contribute, every task, every detail you keep running without recognition. Be your own accountant. Acknowledge your invisible capital. Because the first step toward earning others' respect is respecting yourself with a conviction that doesn't break for anyone. Your peace, your dignity, and your energy are priceless, and you don't need anyone's permission to claim them. My story found its ending, one that I wrote, produced, and financed myself. But I know there are thousands like mine still being written, stories unfolding every day in kitchens, offices, and living rooms across the world. Mine ended with the sale of a house. But in truth, it began with the purchase of my freedom. And that's an investment that never loses its value. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's entirely mine. And that ownership, the ownership of my independence, is the only one that truly matters. Have you ever had to put a price on your peace just to make someone understand its worth? If my story about how I turned a kitchen into a boardroom and an invoice into a declaration of independence resonated with you, leave me a comment and tell me your experience. And if, like me, you believe that every woman deserves for her value to be recognized and never discounted, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can make sure that more stories of women who stopped serving dinner and started serving justice are finally heard. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.